Hello, this is the second video in a series I'm doing on exploring popular loudness war myths and whether they stand up to scrutiny or not. And something interesting is happening in the music news this week, which means I'm going to do a different topic than the one I'd planned in this video. So in this video, I'm going to look at whether certain genres of music need that loudness war sound in order to sound right. And the two examples that keep coming up are EDM and metal. And this week, the news story that I mentioned is the release of the new Fallujah album, The Flesh Prevails. And it sparked an intense online debate as a result of this review on the Angry Metal Guy website. Basically, the guy who's reviewing it is saying he thinks it's a really good album, but for him, it's spoiled by the very aggressive mastering. The level is pushed onto the CD at a very high level. It has a very restricted dynamic range, a very low crest factor, peak to loudness ratio, as so much music these days has, particularly in this genre. And this reviewer believes that the album would have sounded better with more dynamics. What's fascinating is that in the comments on the review on the website, the guy who recorded, mixed and mastered the project, Zach Oren, has joined in the debate and given his side of the story, explaining why he made the decisions he did and why he thinks they were the right decisions for this album. And I just want to say, I take my hat off to Zach for the calm and professional way that he's handled the debate that has happened on the Angry Metal Guy site and on the Metal-Fi site, who picked up on this review and talked about their opinions about the sound and the debate that has happened. And it's hard to accept criticism like that and to respond to it calmly. And I think there's been a great debate on both websites about all the issues that this master and the controversy bring out. So, Zach Oren, I salute you. And where it gets really interesting is that he has posted this example file with sections from the released version of the album and some sections that are much less heavily compressed. So for those of you who use the TT meter, lots of tracks on the album are DR3, one of them is even DR2, whereas in this segment he contrasts with examples that I think are up to DR10. And he's arguing that actually the music needs this sound, it was an intentional process, the genre requires it, the style of music requires it, and that the music signal hasn't been damaged. And I thought you guys would like to hear that and judge for yourselves. So, I'm just going to play that sample file to you. I've deliberately hidden all of the meters in Wavelab temporarily. Bear in mind that some sections of what you're going to hear have the full original dynamic range of the mix, the full peak to loudness ratio. Other sections don't. Take a listen, see what you can hear. So there you go. And of course, those examples were loudness matched so that you could do a fair comparison between the two. So I don't know what differences you thought you could hear. If you're not sure, rewind the video, take a few more listens, and now I will re-enable the meters and let you see the waveforms so that you can see and hear the differences. So see what you think this time. So I found this clip surprising and fascinating for several reasons. I think the first thing to say is, for me personally, when I can see the waveforms, I can hear the differences that the processing is making much more clearly. And we need to be careful about that, because actually what you'll find is if you listen again and close your eyes or rewind the video to where I had the meters hidden, you'll find it much harder to hear those differences again, even though you know that they are there. When I first listened to the file, I would never have guessed that he was alternating so rapidly between the two different versions. So we need to be careful to listen with our ears and not our eyes. However obvious it seems when we look at the waveform, actually I think Zach has a point that he hasn't had to sacrifice a huge amount in terms of the processing he's added to this file, even though he's restricted the peak level so dramatically to achieve the results that he has. But there is a difference, and I think the second interesting thing is where that difference is. We often think that Loudness War casualties are going to sound more distorted or more aggressive or more harsh. The way that I hear the differences in this file is that actually the dynamic versions are warmer and bigger. I can hear that kind of chug, that kind of throb that a guitar amp has. You know, if you've ever been to a metal gig or seen a band play, seen a player play, there's this kind of feedback between the instrument and the amp, and that's what I feel is there in the more dynamic sections of this file and is missing in the gaps in between. So the dynamic sections sound bigger, the more controlled peak limited sections sound smaller to me. Maybe, you know, take another listen and see whether you can hear that as well, whether you agree with me. I think the final thing to say, and the point of this video there really is, I mean, you could argue, based on what I've just shown you, that actually maybe the loudness wars aren't such a big deal. If we can restrict the peak to loudness value of a piece of music that much without there being a night and day difference, yes, there's an audible difference, but it's not enormous. I mean, this album is as loud as Death Magnetic by Metallica, which is held up as kind of the ultimate Loudness War album. It doesn't sound anywhere near as distorted as that album. So maybe it's okay to make music this loud. And there are two sections to my answer to that. The first one is, when music has been produced like this, to have a very dense, controlled, compressed sound in the mix, which Zach has explained as what he was after when he was recording and mixing the band, you can apply all this extra dynamics processing at the end without completely destroying it. The songs were mixed and recorded to have loudness potential, meaning the level could be pushed up against zero in that way without horrendous damage happening. But the question is, what's the point? As we saw in the first of these Loudness War Myths videos, I don't think anybody would argue that the more squashed sections of that track actually sound better. I think probably the very best you could say about those heavily peak limited versions is that they don't sound any worse. I personally think they do sound worse, although not disastrously so. But the real big takeaway from this, and the point of this video, is that entire file sounds like Fallujah. It sounds like metal. The more dynamic sections sound like metal, the more squashed sections sound like metal. You don't need that final stage of peak level crush, that final stage of limiting, however it's been done, to make the band sound like Fallujah. It's not a requirement. I actually think it sounds better in the less compressed versions. You may or may not agree with that. I'm convinced that for long-term listening, as you listen to that album again and again and again, the more dynamic version, even though the differences are quite subtle, will be less fatiguing, more involving. You'll get more listening pleasure out of that version that has more room to breathe. And if you're setting out to record, mix, produce, master your music to get this sound in this genre, you can choose. Don't feel that you have to go after that very dense, very limited, very controlled sound. You can get the sound you need with plenty of dynamics. And I actually think if Zach had set out with a different goal and had really tried to utilize those dynamics that were available to him, he could have got it sounding even better. We'll never know, but maybe if some people see this video, they'll think differently about the kind of sound they aim for next time they're recording, mixing, and mastering. And I think the final thing I want to say is that the arguments that I've put forward in this video don't just apply to metal. In my opinion, they apply to every musical genre, even EDM, electronic dance music, trance, electronica. It doesn't matter how aggressive the style is. For me, music will always sound better with more dynamics and never benefits from having those dynamics reduced beyond a certain point. You need to find that loudness sweet spot where the balance of dynamics and loudness is just right. So there you go. I hope you found that useful and interesting. Subscribe to the YouTube channel to make sure you get future updates. Watch out for the next in this series of exploring Loudness War Myths soon. And head over to my website, productionadvice.co.uk, if you'd like more information about recording, mixing and mastering your own music. My name is Ian Shepherd. Thanks for listening.